Hello, one and all, and welcome to another episode of Top Deck Thoughts. Now, for this episode, we're going to be talking about something that's going to be coming up in a few weeks that's been leading to a lot of people being very volatile with their reactions of this, and that is the new mini set, mini in quotation marks, because we're having like over 780 cards. Essentially, Jumpstart Historic Horizons. For those who don't know what Jumpstart is, the basic premise of Jumpstart is essentially you choose between two packets, like you get a first packet, you get a second packet. Those packets are based on a theme. You put them together into one deck, and then you go against people in what mostly on Arena is a queue event, which apparently is going to be best of three in this case, where you essentially play against each other in the deck, try to get a few wins. If you get wins, you actually will win cards from the new set, which is relevant since for this set, for this Jumpstart, rather than having like customized packages based on cards within past as well as a few sprinkled new cards, they are actually taking cards from essentially Modern Horizons 1 and Modern Horizons 2. As well as some other new cards, which we're going to get to that. And, well, I think the thing is, the response to this one's been interesting, and I think the way I'm going to bring this out and just explain it and try to explain a little bit of the nuances is both the pros and kind of the cons. So, let's talk about the pros of the fact that they're bringing around over essentially two sets as well as some little additional cards that are reprints essentially. Pretty much Modern Horizons 1, Modern Horizons 2 cards, as well as a few additional new cards. Yes, we are going to talk about the new digital kind of like mechanic cards in a bit, but let's just get to the big quantity of cards that they are bringing in to essentially putting it in this Jumpstart formula. I think one of the pros that people are kind of missing with this is I do think that there is actually a little bit of ingenuity to actually using the Jumpstart formula to actually introduce these two very, very big, complicated draft sets. Like, great draft sets, but they are a little bit high-level play kind of scenario with their drafting format and such, especially using older mechanics that maybe new players are not familiar with, like, for example, Evoke or even Delirium, etc., etc. So I feel like Jumpstart is actually kind of a great way to actually introduce those mechanics to potentially new players to the format and such, which is actually kind of a cool thing. Like, they can essentially get like a bite-sized chunk of essentially these mechanics that are within these thematic packs that we've been seeing spoiled throughout the past week and this upcoming week. I think that's actually a really ingenious idea just to give people accustomed to the cards, let them get used to it and such, and then maybe potentially bring it to Historic. Which then kind of leads to the semi-con of using the Jumpstart formula for this, which is, well, we are going to have to talk about the economy again, because, as stated before, we are getting around over 780 cards. And it's safe to say that there's going to be a good portion of these cards that will affect the modern form, or not even, I'd say modern because this is Modern Horizons, but will actually affect the historic format. I mean, they even show a few off here that will definitely affect the format. Dragon Rage Channeler, Mole Drifter, Ranger Captain of Eos, Chatterfane's even coming into it as a mythic. And the problem is due to the current realms of how the economy kind of works, which is we don't really have a way, the only way we generate wild cards is buying packs, as well as just getting gems, or just essentially getting a reprint of, or just essentially getting over the card limit, getting the gems quality, which then adds to the vault. I could go into detail, but for people who probably are watching this, they probably know how the Vault Fiend works, but nevertheless, for those who are not, Quick Fiend is essentially once you get additional cards you don't need in your collection since you already have a playset, they add it to gems as well as a little progress to the vault. Once your vault goes to 100%, you get like one mythic, two rares, a few uncommons, and I think common wild card. To put it bluntly, the current system of how you get wild cards is extremely flawed. Like, I'm not going to say it's hard because I kind of want to say it's bad, but it feels very, it's very annoying. Like, a little bit predatory, even potentially. Some could definitely view it as predatory, and I would not blame them one bit. Let's just put it like that. And the problem is with this system, the factor is they kind of, with using the Jumpstart system, you're essentially now having to either play this format multiple times, which granted we only have like about a little bit over a month with this new format coming on August 12th. So you gotta hope you either going to be playing a lot of Jumpstart to essentially get the cards you want for Historic and hope you get the right packs and get the right cards within those packs, or you're going to have to buy a lot of packs of maybe a set that you already got a collection for to essentially then get the wild cards that you need to essentially be able to craft the cards you want in the Historic format. Which, that is a ridiculously big barrier, especially for people who are, some of them are even content creators who are going to have a little bit of a tricky time trying to make, if they especially focus on Historic content, they're going to have a little bit of a tricky time to actually get the cards needed for this until, like, maybe I would say, if they're lucky, about over a month and a half to 2 months, or even more, or it's going to cost them a lot of cash. And I know a lot of people are like, well, Magic is a game where you have to have money to play Magic. Why is this a big deal? It's kind of a big deal on kind of two ways. First way, if you're a person, like I said before, like if you're a budget content creator, like for me, I work as this as a part-time, kind of like a part-time thing. I do this on the part. And even I'm finding the hard to chew to the factor that I might have to play Jumpstart, which hopefully it's a fun format. I'm hoping it's a fun format, but even then, I would have to play the format multiple times, hope that I get the cards I need for the format, and then, if necessarily, maybe get the necessary kind of like progress to the vault to get all the cards I needed to construct stuff in the Historic format. Gratefully, I don't focus on Historic too much with my content creation, so this ain't much of a big deal, but I know a lot of people and a lot of content creators as well as streamers who do play Historic, and who even play Historic competitively, and this is going to be a ridiculously big either time barrier or financial barrier to them. Now, one thing I did learn while actually watching the Magic, essentially Magic Weekly from last Thursday, I was kind of asking the question, be like, if there's going to be other methods to actually pick up these cards, essentially, if we are going to pick them up in constructed format. They said that they were considering it and it was in the process. However, as we're going to look a little bit earlier in the article, they are actually doing a very, very big, like, patch update from essentially, by the way, just a quick update, on August 10th, it's going to be a 4 hour of downtime from essentially 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. PST time. Essentially, Arena is going to be down. And that's because they're doing a major, like, recalibration, major things of how the cards work within the system. And one thing that I was a little bit initially concerned about, but thanks to this whole new kind of essentially recalibrations is one of the things that they're actually going to be working on, is the fact that one thing about the Jumpstart that was a teeny little fault is you sometimes will have packs that have cards from older sets, like maybe, let's say, for example, World Strider from Pharaohs within the original Jumpstart. Well, if you pull a packet with World Strider and you already had a playset of World Strider, you then now get just a World Strider that is a Jumpstart World Strider, which doesn't really make any sense. I mean, I guess in the sense that maybe you want the Jumpstart emblem on your World Strider. It doesn't really make any sense. Like, you could use that as like a card style or something like that for emblems or such, like little icon emblems depending on the set. Well, due to this new recalibration that they're actually doing, that's not going to be a thing anymore. So if you open a packet that has like an Eldraine card that you already have a playset of, you're going to get the gems and you're going to get the progress in the vault, which is a nice thing to hear about. That is a nice thing to quell at least one of my concerns. I will admit, though, still, even with that recalibration, I really hope that in the future, once they get done with this big one, that they focus on maybe making like little bundles or such for people who want to get specific cards from Jumpstart Historic Horizons that are more constructed viable. Which, maybe that's why they're giving a little bit of time. Maybe they're wanting to see what cards get really popular in Historic Horizons to inevitably make bundles in the future for people who want to play those decks. That could be the case. I really don't know what they're going to be doing with this. I'm kind of curious. But yeah, one of the cons, definitely, for this being a 780 card set through the Jumpstart system is that the barrier to technically potentially put these cards within competitive Historic, or even content creation if you make Historic decks, the barrier might be a little bit annoying to a bit of a really big hassle that might deter people from playing the format, which you really, really don't want to do. Okay, another component that's upcoming with Historic Horizons that's going to be a first, and the one that's kind of brought the most, dare we say, volatile reactions, to some being like concerned, to some of them being very reductive, to some just being a little annoyed. The introduction of digital only mechanics, which, for those who don't know, there's going to be a few cards within the set, specifically within the Planeswalker quote unquote packs, as well as kind of been sprinkled out for the other packets. There's going to be these new cards in the set that essentially have digital base only mechanics. Like, for example, I'm not going to go into detail of all of them. I'm actually going to wait for that till I review these cards, because these are quote unquote the new cards of the set, so I feel like having a separate review video of that would be actually nice just for constructive possibility, and this is more of an opinion piece here. But basically, there's a few mechanics in this set that essentially that are pretty much only can be played within a digital client. AKA, kind of like, as much as I hate using the reductive term, yes, we are getting kind of like a little bit of Hearthstone based mechanics within the set. Somewhat. I think it's a little bit reductive calling it doing the Hearthstone theme, but it's the one that's kind of like what people can think of right off the bat. Like, the only one I'll mention right off the bat is, like, for example, Convoke, where essentially you conjure a card, which basically says the card essentially generates and gets put into your hand. So, in other words, kind of like a thing that you can only do in digital, which really you can't really do in paper unless you go with the Garth route, which is like make a token copy of this. So, let's talk about the pros and cons of digital base only mechanics within Arena. First, I'm going to talk about the positives. Yes, I am going to get to the what I think is a little bit of the negatives, but I want to really talk about the positives first, because I'm a little bit excited for the digital only cards. I'm not going to lie. And that's mostly because I like seeing designers design new cards, and I like them trying to take advantage of the best of the format that they are designing cards for. Specifically for Arena, in Historic, you are designing around a digital client, and the factor that they can allow having this format to be able to test digital-based mechanics to both maybe make some new unique card designs that maybe players can have fun with and be able to test, that's really cool. Like, for example, Perpetual, really cool mechanic. Like, putting, like, essentially either like, mechanic counters or, like, negative reductive stats on cards themselves, and then they stick on the card. Really, really cool. Even the Conjure mechanic, as much as people kind of get annoyed that this is kind of like the most Hearthstone-y mechanic of the bunch, there's some really, really cool Conjure cards. Like, there's some that, like, literally make it where if you want to, you could design your deck to be like a Momil Vig type of deck, which is really, really cool. So I do like the fact that the arena-based Magic designers and such are testing kind of like digital-based mechanics formats and taking the best advantage of the client. So I love that. I do love seeing these unique designs personally. I do want to see kind of like how they can be tested in the historic format, and I do just love to see what these do. Plus, also, if these become ever busted, then the fact that the digital only cards means that they can, instead of being quote unquote banned, they could actually just be altered and such. Because the problem with paper only cards is you really can't alter the text on the card unless you go through the whole errata kind of thing, like they did with, for example, Companions is probably the most recent example that people can think of right off the bat, but there's like little times here and there. But with digital cards, the benefit here is if a card becomes really, really powerful to the point of warping the format, they can actually nerf these digital cards where they really probably can't with the paper component of it. So yeah, I'm really excited for this. Is there a con to this? I think there is a semi-con to this, and I feel like I'm going to have to elaborate on the con of this. The problem is, as much as I love the digital card designs and such, and I love seeing them doing experimenting and testing the format to the best opinion, there is the potential that they might be testing this in the wrong format. What do I mean by that? Well, as much as Historic has been an experimental format, Historic, at its basis, at its core, is essentially a format that basically amounts to, hey, I can't play my deck in Standard anymore, or there's cards that I want to play with that really I can't play in Standard anymore because they rotate out. hey, I can play them in Historic and play my deck archetypes of the past and such and just have fun with them. It has a bit of a coating of, dare we say, nostalgia, let's just say. It has a coating of nostalgia of people just wanting to play essentially their old cards, play maybe with their deck archetypes and see how they fare against kind of like the expanding card library that happens post rotation. Stuff like that. And even when they did experiment with Historic in the past, it's safe to say that their experiments have still been, in one way or another, been kind of nostalgia coated, if for lack of a better word. Essentially, in the sense, like, for example, the remastered draft sets, that's all been based on sets in the past, and sets that are people that are very nostalgic for, like Kaladesh Remastered, Amacat Remastered. Those were sets that people were very, very nostalgic for. They did love the fact that they could play with their old archetypes again that they probably played with during Standard. It fit in the historic quote-unquote mantra, if that makes sense. Even Jumpstart, even though Jumpstart introduced a bunch of new cards to the format, like this new Jumpstart's going to, the thing that Jumpstart had the semi-benefit of is the fact that a majority of the new cards were essentially cards to assist packets that would assist deck archetypes that people were very nostalgic for. Tribal decks, artifact-based deck designs, goblins, enough said. I mean, heck, even the fact that we have Craterhoof Behemoth in the format made Elves a very playable deck archetype, which made people very nostalgic since it's very, very close to kind of like the legacy Elves pretty much compatriot, so to speak. So it still had the nostalgia coating. And you could make an argument that even with Modern Horizons 1 and 2 Jumpstart bringing in, it still brings back the nostalgia as well, because it brings back a bunch of mechanics, like some that even I love, like Madness, or even Delirium and such. So being able to test back old cards, essentially from Modern Horizons 2, that had initially designed bit of old base mechanics, then you could probably make the logic, well, people will like this because it allows them to advance and actually pretty much either build new or still build existing archetypes of things that they played in the past. The problem is, though, is when they introduced the digital cards, and I think that's the thing that kinda was the retrospective sore thumb for a lot of players, because remember, a lot of people went into the format just to play their old archetypes, and maybe just, like, it's essentially kind of the realms of they don't really want, like, new cards in the sense that it doesn't assist their archetypes, even though technically the digital-only cards might be able to be good assistant of their old archetypes. But the thing is, it makes them very familiar with cards and maybe the reason why they, like, escaped other digital card games. Like, for example, Hearthstone, Runeterra, even, like, Eternal and such, because maybe they didn't want the digital-only based mechanics, they want basically a nostalgia realm of being able to play their paper formats that they played before without the digital only mechanics. And I think that's what is causing the alienation of a lot of people from the digital cards. Even though a large majority of these digital cards, I would say, with a lot more wording and such, could actually be cards you could see in paper. Like, for example, some of these cards we would see have a mutate counter or a plus counter on it. Or maybe create a token copy, kind of like with Garth, for example, as we mentioned before. But to make them more convenient within the digital client, they have these new digital-only mechanics. Which then, while I say there's a portion of the audience that love these cards, that are going to love them, I would say even a lot of streamers are going to love them because they will lead to kind of like streamer-based shenanigans. I do think these cards will alienate the people who do play the historic format just for kind of like being able to play their old decks or play the old archetypes. And what's more, playing it for the nostalgic feel, if that makes sense. So, yeah. I will say, though, I think one way to remedy that con, I would say, is the potential of maybe creating I'm not saying something to do right off the bat, but maybe something to consider for the future is maybe make a classic or vintage in quotation marks, but more like a classic format where if they are going to go on the route of testing digital only card designs, make a format that doesn't have digital card designs essentially. That way, then if people just want to play it just to play their old decks without not really worrying about any of the new digital cards, then they can play that format and they'll be like, okay, you can have fun with this, and then hopefully then everybody will be quote unquote happy. The people who are happy about the digital card designs that essentially want to see how Magic delves within their arena client design with a card design, and the people who more prefer the paper format and just essentially wants to play their old deck designs, but don't want to play standard or don't want to play draft for their paper kind of like preferred needs, so to speak. Also, another new theme of the format, which new theme that we're going to be talking about is, hey, 100 card historic brawl is coming. Awesome sauce. I do love the fact that they introduced this. I'm going to make this quick. Great that they're introducing this. I love this format. It's a fun format to play. I might make some deck content videos on this once the format launches. It's a fun format, and it's definitely going to be one of the more better, kind of like for content creators who are still playing in historic, kind of like a way to enter content creation and such, being able to make the historic format decks and such, like the 100 card historic brawls, because then it's a lot more lenient on your wild card budget when you only need one of each card, while in more competitive constructed formats you need four of. So I'm definitely excited to see what content gets created from this. I know the Brewer's Kitchen was like ecstatic, so very, very nice. Nevertheless, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I kind of wanted to talk about my 2 cents about this whole, essentially, Jumpstart Historic Horizons. And really, I think the best way I'm going to phrase this is sometimes with this, I think you just need to look at this from a realm of empathy. And I like what Dev from Strictly Better Magic the Gathering put it. Essentially, try your best not to be very reductive with this and try to understand, be empathetic of people and try to understand their perspectives. Like, there's going to be some people who love the digital card designs because it allows them to see the exploration design within the digital client. But on the other hand, there's some people who would rather just be able to play the old deck designs and such, or just play essentially without having to worry about digital based mechanics and worry that it would go into the realm of some digital based mechanics that may not like, or maybe have like in the realm of uncontrolled variants, which that's a whole nother topic, can of worms, that's a whole nother video, I'm going to be honest. Nevertheless, that's kind of like my top deck thoughts on the Historic Horizons. I'm personally excited about it, but I'm also coming at it with a little bit of caution. So, hopefully the designers as well as people on the arena team kind of like heard the feedback, both the constructive as well as the more probably not as constructive reaction to this, and hopefully can accommodate to it. Nevertheless, I'll be excited. I do kind of want to try this format out with the Jumpstart and see, because I'll say one thing. The semi-designer hobbyist in me is very interested in this to see how they can essentially take what essentially is two large sets, as well as a few kind of like new cards and such, and make it into this Jumpstart formula and see if it makes it more of a fun, engaging experience. I'm really curious. I really want to test this out. And, well, that's Top Deck Thoughts today. I hope you all have a lovely day or evening when you're watching this. See y'all later. Bada beep. Bada boop.